It is a long way from the initial ideas and dreams of moon travel to the first moon landing. As early as the 12th century, rocket launches were taking place in China. However, at that time, the Chinese couldn't use them for space travel. Instead, they used small fireworks rockets to scare the horses of their enemies during battles. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, in 1555, the German Konrad Haas ignites the first multi-stage rocket. Haas describes the principles of rocket technology as a weapon and fireworks. He also explores various solid and liquid rocket propellants. But at that time, people still could not be transported by rockets. Almost 350 years later, in 1903, the Russian Konstantin Eduardovich Tsiolkovsky delves into spaceflight theory and publishes his rocket equation in the book Exploration of Outer Space by Means of Rocket Devices. To escape Earth's gravity, he suggests, considering liquid rocket propellants. The German rocket pioneer and visionary Hermann Oberth develops a realistic concept for a liquid-fueled manned space rocket in 1917 and writes the book The Rocket into Planetary Space in 1923, predicting many future developments in space travel. In 1926, Robert Goddard launches the first liquid-fueled rocket in the United States. The small rocket stays in the air for only 2.5 seconds, flying 50 meters and 14 meters high. His contribution to space exploration is recognized and appreciated long after his death. In 1928, Wernher von Braun, at a young age and following the theory of his mentor, Hermann Oberth, develops an innovative rocket propulsion system. Later, during World War II, he becomes the crucial designer of the first military liquid-fueled rocket, officially designated Aggregate 4, but commonly known as V2, the Vengeance weapon. The German V2 is a strategic long-range weapon with a length of 14 meters. Due to its high speed, advance warning with air raid sirens is not possible. The unexpected impacts in London have an unimaginable terrorizing and demoralizing effect on the population. The V2 rocket is also the first human-made object to cross the boundary to space at an altitude of 100 kilometers. 1945, after the end of the war, German experts in rocket technology were highly sought after by the United States and the Soviet Union due to their significant technological advancements. In the following Cold War, the West and the East competed with different worldviews. The atomic bomb, previously deployable only by aircraft, becomes the most significant new weapon of the Cold War with the new rocket technology. In 1953, the first test flight of the American ballistic missile takes place with the V-2, now called Redstone, further developed by Wernher von Braun. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union launches the first satellite Sputnik into Earth's orbit. Even amateur radio operators worldwide can receive the ominous and monotonous radio signal from the first artificial satellite. This demonstrates the East's capability to reach any location on Earth with intercontinental nuclear weapons, celebrating its military superiority. In the West, this new threat from space triggers the so-called Sputnik shock. The USA responds by launching their satellite Explorer into Earth's orbit. The fear of a global apocalypse grows daily, with the possibility of a third world war involving nuclear intercontinental missiles becoming increasingly likely. In 1958, the United States establishes the civilian space agency, NASA, initiating the first space program, Mercury. The race to space gains momentum. The Soviet Union extends its lead, sending the first human Yuri Gagarin into space on April 12, 1961, using the Vostok rocket. The Americans urgently seek a discipline in which they can surely surpass the Soviets. Only a moon landing is considered suitable for this purpose. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy convinces the U.S. Congress of the moon mission, thereby legitimizing its billion-dollar funding. With his historic speech, he gives the green light for the moon landing and the required Apollo program.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
It is a long way from the initial ideas and dreams. In 1958, the United States discipline in which surpass only Americans urgently seek a discipline in program.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
We are in the year 1961, and the Apollo program is underway. In preparation, NASA simultaneously launches the Gemini program to gather necessary experience in rendezvous maneuvers and navigation in Earth's orbit. For the Apollo program, aimed at achieving a moon landing, Wernher von Braun and Arthur Rudolph developed the largest and most powerful carrier rocket to date. It consists of 3 stages, stands at a height of 110 meters, has a diameter of 10 meters, a launch weight of approximately 3,000 tons, and engines with a thrust of 160 million horsepower. It is named Saturn V. From 1961 to 1966, several unmanned Apollo test launches take place with smaller rockets from the Saturn family. In 1967, the Apollo program experiences a tragic incident. On January 27th, during a ground training simulation in the Test Command capsule, a malfunction causes a sudden fire, resulting in the loss of all 3 astronauts. The deceased crew is posthumously designated Apollo 1. A manned Apollo test flight is conducted only in October 1968 with Apollo 7, during which various maneuvers are still tested in Earth's orbit with a Saturn 1B rocket. On December 21st, during Apollo 8, astronauts already fly to the moon for the first time using the larger Saturn V. The average flight time to the moon is approximately 3 days. On Christmas Eve, the crew reaches lunar orbit, where the astronauts recite the first lines of the biblical creation story. During the 10 orbits around the moon, several spectacular images are captured, including the well-known Earthrise photo. A moon landing is not yet planned. In March 1969, Apollo 9 performs docking and rendezvous maneuvers with the lunar module in Earth's orbit, and the Apollo spacesuit is tested during an extravehicular activity in space. Just 2 months later, in May, the Apollo 10 crew flies to the moon to conduct a test landing approach. The lunar module approaches the moon's surface to within 14 kilometers. Thus, all necessary maneuvers, except for the landing itself, have been completed. A moon landing is now imminent. With Apollo 11, the time for a moon landing seems to have arrived for the first time. Here you can see a model of Earth and the moon, correctly depicted in terms of distance and size. The following simulation runs in fast forward. On the morning of July 16, 1969, at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral, Florida, the three astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins board the Saturn V. After igniting the 5 F1 engines, the rocket slowly lifts off with a deafening roar. After 2 minutes and 44 seconds, the spent rocket stage is jettisoned at an altitude of 59 kilometers. The second stage ignites, and shortly afterward, the escape tower is removed as it is no longer needed. The separation of the second stage follows after approximately 9 minutes at an altitude of 166 kilometers. Stage 3 ignites and, after nearly 12 minutes of flight, reaches Earth orbit at an altitude of almost 190 kilometers. After 1.5 Earth orbits, the third stage ignites again for nearly 6 minutes to take the remaining rocket out of Earth's orbit and onto a course for the moon. Immediately after leaving Earth's orbit, the first daring maneuver occurs, the docking and extraction. The Command Service Module, CSM for short, also called the Columbia spacecraft, is separated from the third stage, rotated 180 degrees, and docked to the Lunar Module. The Lunar Module, then with the Command Service Module, is pulled out of the no longer needed rocket stage. The long flight to the moon can now begin. During this journey, the spacecraft continuously rotates on its own axis, evenly distributing temperature due to the constant sunlight from one direction and the cold influence from the shaded side on the spacecraft hull, preventing overheating and freezing. After the 3-day flight, the astronauts reach the moon. Through a braking maneuver, they enter lunar orbit. On July 20th, 1969, Armstrong and Aldrin transfer to the lunar module named Eagle, while Collins remains in the Columbia spacecraft. The lunar module is detached from the Command Service Module, the landing legs are deployed, and the automatic descent sequence is initiated. Unfortunately, slight unintentional discrepancies in timing coordination arise during the undocking process. Subsequently, the onboard computer incorrectly calculates a landing site approximately 6 kilometers behind the originally planned landing area. Additionally, during the descent from an altitude of about 1.5 kilometers, alarm messages 1202 and 1201 are triggered. As the astronauts now focus their full attention on the current error messages, correcting the displaced landing target takes a backseat, as it could mean an immediate abort of the landing. The alarm is promptly examined under high pressure by the control center in Houston, Texas. And it turns out that the rendezvous radar is accidentally still switched to the lunar module radar, flooding the onboard computer with unintended data. In Houston, the messages are classified as non-critical, allowing the landing in Mare Tranquillitatis to proceed. Armstrong, who looks out the window just before landing and notices that the landing site previously calculated by the computer is directly in a huge boulder field, takes immediate control through manual steering. He navigates the dangerous terrain with numerous large rocks at the edge of the West Crater. The red line indicates the trajectory calculated by the autopilot. The green line shows the landing flight path actually flown manually by Armstrong, with the landing site approximately 500 meters west, on a flat and safe terrain. On July 21, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin leave the lunar surface. Upon returning to lunar orbit, they dock with the ascent stage of the lunar module at the Columbia spacecraft. The lunar module is jettisoned, and the reunited 3-member crew begins the journey back to Earth. On July 24th, after a 3-day flight, they discard the no longer needed service module just before Earth re-entry. Entry into Earth's atmosphere is a highly critical phase of the mission, during which the command module heats up to nearly 3,000 degrees Celsius. A special heat shield protects the spacecraft from burning up. Braked by parachutes, the 3 astronauts safely splash down in the Pacific Ocean, approximately 1,800 kilometers southwest of Hawaii. The aircraft carrier Hornet is already on site, Its recovery crew brings the 3 astronauts on board with a Sikorsky helicopter. Due to concerns about potential extraterrestrial microorganisms, the astronauts undergo a 17-day quarantine in an isolated mobile unit. On August 13, 1969, the moon landing heroes are celebrated with a parade in New York. The USA has won the race to the moon. Between 1969 and 1972, exactly 6 manned Apollo moon landings took place, with 12 people stepping onto the moon. In 1970, Apollo 13 experienced a technical incident during the journey to the moon, forcing the crew to perform an immediate return maneuver. The Apollo 13 astronauts were unable to land on the moon as planned. Apollo 15, 16, and 17 carried an electric-powered lunar rover on board, called the Lunar Roving Vehicle, or LRV. The moon rover allowed for the transport of more lunar rocks and expanded the range of surface excursions. The 2-seater had a top speed of 13 kilometers per hour and a maximum range of 90 kilometers. The rover's camera also captured the launches of ascent stages during Apollo 16 and 17. In 1972, the Apollo program was terminated due to financial and domestic political reasons. The Apollo program cost $25.4 billion US, which would be nearly $164 billion today. In total, up to 400,000 people were involved. After Apollo, Saturn rockets were still used in the Skylab project until 1973. Skylab was the first and only purely American research station in Earth orbit. The space laboratory essentially consisted of the second stage of a Saturn rocket. Simultaneously with Apollo, the Soviets developed their own moon landing program using the N-1 carrier rocket. In 1974, following a clear winner in the race to the moon, the USA, so the Soviet Union, definitively abandoned its moon landing program after several catastrophically failed launch attempts with the N-1. The rocket could not complete only one successful flight. Here you can see a comparison between the American Saturn V and the Soviet N-1. The respective lunar modules, the Lunar Module LM and the Soviet Lunar Lander LK, are also juxtaposed. The Soviet lander weighs only a third of the American lunar module, and it has space for only one cosmonaut. However, the Soviet Union was not entirely unsuccessful. Still, during the Apollo program in 1970, they landed a remotely controlled rover named Lunokhod 1 on the moon, the first remotely operated vehicle on a celestial body. The moon rover was equipped with cameras and several scientific instruments. In July 1975, the last Saturn rocket is launched, carrying 3 American astronauts for an unprecedented rendezvous. Amidst the Cold War, the rival superpowers, the USA and the Soviet Union, meet in Earth orbit during the Apollo-Soyuz test, a groundbreaking project for peaceful cooperation in space and a clear signal for pacifism during these tense times. Since the docking systems of the 2 spacecraft are incompatible, a special adapter had to be developed. After docking and opening the hatches, a historic handshake takes place between the astronauts. During the subsequent space dinner, the American astronauts are served the Russian national dish borscht from a tube, and the crews are able to conduct joint scientific experiments. Several probes with different tasks have been sent to the Earth satellite by Americans, Soviets, and also by Europeans. Since 2009, the NASA Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, has been orbiting the moon to this day. The LRO is equipped with several scientific instruments, including a high-resolution camera that maps the moon's surface 3-dimensional. It has also captured images of the historical 6 Apollo landing sites, where the footprints of the astronauts are clearly visible alongside the landers and equipment. With the Indian probe Chandrayaan-1, the moon came further into focus in space exploration, as the probe could confidently confirm indications of water from earlier lunar probes. However, water on the moon exists only as ice in deep craters near the polar regions, and in frozen and bound form in rocks and lunar soil, also known as regolith. Economic interests are now becoming more prominent, as the moon not only provides vital water but also oxygen for breathing, and even an efficient rocket propellant that can be produced directly on the moon. Through electrolysis, the water molecule H2O is split into its two elements, hydrogen and oxygen. This opens the possibility of constructing and operating a lunar base with an attached spaceport, as the heavy resource of water does not need to be transported from Earth to the Moon. Also, rocket launches from the Moon towards Mars would be significantly more efficient due to the lower gravity, making a lunar base a stepping stone to other planets. In 2013, China sent its first rover, Jade Rabbit 1, Yutu-1, to the Moon. In 2019, Jade Rabbit 2, Yutu-2 even landed on the far side of the Moon. Meanwhile, private companies have developed economic interests in space exploration and the Moon. Competing U.S. space companies like SpaceX, led by entrepreneur Elon Musk, and Blue Origin, led by Amazon founder Jeff Bezos, announced plans to contribute their own developed space technologies to NASA for a manned lunar program starting in the mid-2020s. However, to this day, it holds true. Since December 14, 1972, with Apollo 17, the last Apollo moon mission, no human has set foot on the Moon. The lunar module is in the process of landing. Previously, the computer-guided landing system almost maneuvered it into a field of rocks. To prevent this, Armstrong took control of the landing using a control lever.
Low level? Low level.
Good. Turn 20 feet. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 5%. 100 bite. Okay, 75 feet. Starts looking good, down a half.
Roger.
6 forward.
60 seconds.
60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. That's 40 feet down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow.
And down to 30.
4 forward. 4 forward. Drifting to the right a little.
30. 30 seconds.
Down a half. 30 seconds. Forward. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. APA at a descent. Mode control both auto. Descent engine command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in.
We've had shutdown.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Armstrong is the first to leave the lunar module.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Okay, I just checked getting back up to that first step. That hasn't collapsed too far, but it's adequate to get back up. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches.
On July 21, 1969, at 2:56 Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, Neil Armstrong becomes the first human to set foot on the lunar surface.
I'm going to step off the LEM now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Michael Collins comments via radio from the Columbia spacecraft on the raising of the U.S. flag.
Yeah, radio loud and clear. How's it going?
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. I believe they're setting up the flag now.
The American president, Richard Nixon, also speaks from the White House congratulating the astronauts.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you... For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world.
Now the scientific equipment complex is being set up. It essentially consists of a laser reflector for precise distance measurement between Earth and the Moon, and a seismometer for measuring moonquakes and the internal structure.
Houston, the passive seismometer has been deployed manually.
Roger.
Buzz Aldrin has already entered the lunar module and Neil Armstrong is following.
Okay, the hatch is closed and latched. And verified secure. Okay.
After a longer break, the stay on the lunar surface concludes after approximately 21 hours in total. The two astronauts check the systems and prepare for the return to the command service module in lunar orbit, where Michael Collins is already waiting for them. The ascent stage liftoff is a highly critical moment, where the detachment of the hold-down bolts must occur in precise synchrony with the ignition of the engine. Any discrepancies during this process could result in the astronauts' certain death.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, port stage, engine arm ascent, proceed.
Here ends the simulated mission sequence of Apollo 11 on the lunar surface. However, feel free to linger and explore, teleport around and access information about the astronauts' legacies. The solar wind composition experiment is a Swiss experiment in which particles of the solar wind are captured in a foil-coated sail. The nylon flag is attached to a long telescopic pole and a horizontal framework made of anodized aluminum. Buzz Aldrin reported that the U.S. flag was blown over during takeoff by the intense exhaust plume of the engine. In later Apollo missions, flags were therefore placed at a safe distance from the lunar modules. By now, the nylon should be significantly faded due to the strong UV radiation from the sun. The TV broadcast of the first moon landing was a monumental media event, watched by approximately 600 million people worldwide. About half of all television stations were involved in the broadcast. A special black and white TV camera was developed. It transmitted Neil Armstrong's historic first step on the moon and was then placed approximately 10 meters away from the lunar module on a tripod to film further activities. The TV camera remained on the moon. Just before the ascent, the astronauts deposited some memorial items on the lunar surface. In a small bag next to the ladder of the lunar module, there are two medals from cosmonauts Gagarin and Komarov, a small blue silicone disc, a golden olive branch, and an Apollo 1 patch. Attached to a rung of the ladder is a plaque with an engraved message of peace. Just before the ascent, the astronauts deposited some memorial items on the lunar surface. In a small bag next to the ladder of the lunar module, there are 2 medals from cosmonauts Gagarin and Komarov, a small blue silicone disc, a golden olive branch, and an Apollo 1 patch. Attached to a rung of the ladder is a plaque with an engraved message of peace.